I remember walking into that police department one time with my newborn baby and my little baby and crying because we had just gotten out of court. And I said, can somebody come over because they're coming home and I'm alone. And they said, we can't do that, Heather. They haven't done anything. And I said to the police officer, the next time you see me, if I'm dead or hurt, I'm sure that you people are going to say that you did everything that could help me. Because eventually I am going to be dead or hurt. And I have babies, and they just, not our problem until something happens.
And I'm Jake Deptula. On today's episode of Strictly Stalking, we're chatting with Heather, who reveals the daily torment she and her family suffered at the hands of their next-door neighbors.
After moving into their new house, Heather and her husband discover the couple next door are encroaching upon their property.
They decide to put up a fence, and their next-door neighbors begin a campaign of harassment and stalking over the next several years.
Fearing for the safety of her family, Heather and her husband hire an attorney to find out more information, and they uncover their neighbor's disturbing history of abuse and harassment in another town.
Heather, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, nice to see you.
Same here.
Hello.
Heather, what was life like for you and your husband before you moved into your new house?
So I met my husband. I was living in the North Country of New Hampshire, ski country, and I met him there. And very close-knit community. You know, everybody's friends. Everybody works in the same ski industry, restaurant industry, and then we ended up making a family. And I had at that point got a pretty good size inheritance from my grandparents who had passed away. So I was pregnant, and we decided the only way, my husband was tattooing at the time, the only way he could make money was to get out of the seasonal ski area industry and move to the southern areas where there's more people and there's work year round. Tourist country, you can't make much of a living. So we moved, found the house of our dreams, moved in together, put all my money into it. It was a duplex, so there was two sides to it. So we figured he'd work, I'd stay home with the baby, and we'd rent out one side to make ends meet. And so that's where it began. When I moved in, I had noticed funny things. ADT system with signs everywhere. The front doors of both sides were those big, heavy, like in a hotel where they've got a peephole, but they were like big, thick doors. And I'm like, why are that? It's like we're in the country. We're still in country. You know, there's not much crime where we moved, but there was a lot of signs of like 3 deadbolts on the door. And I just kind of put it off as the people who owned it must have been really paranoid. You know, like I didn't think much of it at the time.
How did you end up finding the house? Like, what was the discovery process with that?
So interestingly enough, my father had been a real estate agent and had told me to go on a network of real estate properties. And where we were trying to move wasn't quite city, but kind of like where my husband could work in the city, but come home to the country. It was right when the market was high. So like, it was definitely a seller's market at the time. So the houses were going quickly. And we found this property and we just jumped on it because it had, 6 acres of land, big, huge backyard. It was perfect for us. It just worked. It was right in the area where we wanted to be. We fought so hard for that house just to get it before anybody else did.
What was the neighborhood like?
Neighborhood was good. Like, I ended up, when my daughter was born, I ended up volunteering we had a community, like a preschool, and that was like the community preschool. So I worked in there voluntarily and really met a lot of good people. It's a funny neighborhood because it's an old town, but because it was like 45 minutes to an hour to the city, a lot of the old town had converted into very large, fancy houses. But then you had the old people, the families that had lived there forever. So it was quite a mix. There was like some very strange people. And then there was some very, young couples or city people coming in. It was kind of a mix of people. You had like the townies and then the people that came in. So
what did you think of the next door neighbors when you first met them?
So when I first met them, they were very polite, very, I don't want to say nosy, but lots of questions. They immediately, when we were moving in, came over and hovered. Um, an interesting thing was our property never really had a line. It was a field between our house, and their house was really run down. It was really lots of debris in the yard. I'll say debris, but lots of debris in the yard. Very just run down. And then the house, I think it was a property that had been divided because our house was fairly new. And they had lots of geese, had probably 24 geese and probably 20 to 24 chickens. And there was no barrier. And so the first thing I noticed was they were all over the yard. They go to the bathroom a lot, and it was all over my yard. But at first I didn't mind because I didn't really know them and I didn't want to make waves. So it was all good at first. In fact, it was good. I would say, besides them being nosy and annoying, good 5 years in the beginning. I wouldn't say friends, but she would send me recipes. The only problem I really had was I never got a break. She didn't knock on the door. She was staring in the window. She wouldn't call before she came over. She just was always there. And I was just like, oh, okay, I have to go. I didn't know how to make that boundary where we're neighbors, but I want some space, if I went outside, she ran over. So a little intrusive, but it wasn't for 5 years or so. I think it started when I had first started asking her to keep her farm animals on her side. I think that was one of the issues, is that I had to keep asking her. And then it just started she was encroaching, started mowing closer to our house, started parking her car near our house. And there was a driveway at the end near the main road that was a half a donut, and that driveway came over on our land. And so when we bought the house, we had to have her sign something saying, we're allowing you to use the driveway, because if she kept using it, then she could eventually own that piece of land. So I don't know if that made her feel more like that was more of her side. And you don't want to really complain about too much. It's not like they were at that point doing anything that was harassing. It was just annoying.
What did your husband think of all this?
He had just opened up his own business and in Manchester, and he was going to work all the time. I felt a lot like I was dealing with this on my own. He would come home at 6 or 7, and I'm the one watching everything. And I think he just kind of ignored it for a while. I think his way of dealing with it was whatever, I've been working all day. I don't think in the beginning there was a sign that it was going to escalate as fast as it did.
Well, how did things start to escalate?
So him and I had decided that in order to keep the peace, to be honest, and because we had already asked so many times about all the geese. I mean, I had a little baby that was going outside to play, and there was geese poop all over my yard, and I couldn't put the baby down. It was everywhere. The dog would go out and eat it and throw up in the house. It was just awful. The geese would chase us. The geese were mean, so they would chase us when we went outside. So after asking several times, my husband and I sat down and said, well, we'll just put a fence up. First, we had the plan made out of our properties. And the surveyor who was doing it said, between this line here and probably 20, 30 feet over is state land. That's not theirs. And we were like, what? They built a barn on it. They put this huge pond. They had all their debris was all over this piece of property that divided ours. We didn't know that wasn't theirs. So the town had given them a permit without checking, and half their barn was on town property, which as a taxpayer of the town, they're not paying for it, we are. We're basically, as taxpayers, paying for land that they're using. So when the surveyor came out and he was surveying, she immediately went up and harassed him to the point where he left. He's like, I can't do my job. with her harassing me. She ended up calling the DOT on him when he was out there surveying, which I don't know why, but the DOT came out and they're like, we can't do anything. What do you want us to do? She's surveying where the fence should go. Like, the first surveyor left. We ended up, to cover us, get a property lawyer, a property attorney to come out to make sure the survey was right and everything. So my father came. We had the property lawyer there, and me and my husband. And when we were outside looking and measuring the property line to figure out if everything was okay, her husband came out of his back door and yelled, "You have 30 seconds to get off the property. I'm going to shoot you," to all of us in front of my attorney. Half of his body was in the door. He's an ex-Marine. He's diagnosed with PTSD and intimate explosive disorder. And he's threatening to shoot us. So the property lawyer ran behind a tree. My father is a gun activist he carries, so he stood there. I called 911 and my husband ran the house. The police showed up and went to talk to him. And he had told the police officer, if we weren't handled, he was going to get his gun and take care of us all. So he was arrested for that. Unfortunately, he's a vet. So every time we went to court for his case, he would go to the VA hospital. As we're paying a lawyer and sitting there waiting for the case to happen, he would go to the VA hospital and he would say he was off his meds and he wasn't able to stay on trial. So this happened over and over again. So the fence goes up. They harass the fencers. She's literally standing in front of the fencer, like where they're putting the fence in, to the point where they have to be like, so we had to get a police officer out there so that they could do their job. She called the DOT again. They came out again. And we ended up putting the fence right down through that part of that driveway that she used, meaning no more, this is done. The problem was that the main road and the fence, you couldn't have the fence go all the way to the road due to laws. It couldn't go all the way down. So after the fence went up, the harassment continued. She would drive through that little piece of land all over our lawn and then leave to make a point. She'd go around the fence, she'd go all the way around on our lawn, make loops, and then leave. It was just craziness. Like, it just got worse and worse. We had the police at my house all the time because she would make false reports about me. There was one time I came home and she was screaming for her husband after I had just watched her. I just watched her spray herself down. It was a hot summer day with her hose, her garden hose. And she had said to her husband, "Heather just sprayed me over the fence with a hose, call the cops." And I didn't have a garage at the time. You could clearly see when we were home. And let me paint the picture of the fence. The fence was tall, but her property was on a hill. So the fence, you could still see my property. Unless you were up against the fence, you could still see what I did all the time. It was a 10-foot fence, but she could still see over it. She would go into her windows with binoculars and she'd watch me all the time. And if I didn't see her, she'd rattle on her window, so I would, and then she would give me the middle finger. And when I was in my backyard, which she couldn't see from the house, she would run out to her barn, and there was a floor above where there was a big open wide like barn door that opened, and she had set up chairs for her and her husband to watch me in the backyard, and they would sit up there and watch when they every time I went in my backyard. We had a vegetable garden. She at night had gone over and buried all her dog poop in there. Anytime I pulled in and the dachshunds were barking, she would run out and she would charge the fence. She would scream white trash at me, trailer trash at me and I had a baby. I mean, at this time my child was, it'd been a few years. So she was like three or four. And she'd be calling us white trash and trailer park trash. And she would call because she's Jewish, and she would say that I would make Jewish slurs at her and call her Jewish names. It was just, when we had put the fence up, she had wiggled the posts all loose at night. So when I went out one time, the fence was all, we just spent a lot of money on this long fence, and it was all wonky because they had wiggled all free.
Would they just wait for you to come and go every day?
Yep. It could be 5 o'clock at night and she was waiting for me. Yeah, it was an everyday basis, and it was constant. Like, I knew I would start getting anxiety just getting closer to my house because I knew that she was going to be there to do something. At one point, she was burning her household trash. It was a hot summer day, and she had made a pile, like a bonfire pile of trash closer to the fence. And it was plastics, and it was everything in her house. It was like plastic, and that smells horrifying. And she burned it so that it would go in my windows of my house. So I'd called the police on that one, and the fire department came out. She had an excuse for everything she did. When she called us white trash, she was like, I was calling to have my husband take the trash out. So like with the police, she would make that excuse, and the police would say, this is what she said, you have no proof of it. Like, I can't do anything. I tried to get a restraining order because, like, middle of the night, my doorbell would ring randomly. Her husband, the vet, who had mental issues, would go out behind my woods and fire his gun off really close to my house. Anytime I went out with my kids to play, the guns were going off. We had power lines near us that were like sandy, and when I called the police about the guns, they said, well, there's a shooting range behind you. We can't prove that that's him. We don't hear it now. So they had a way of, like, if the line was there, they had a way of crossing it, but just enough where they weren't going to get in trouble. With the property line, I had found, we had now a built out plan of our properties, and I had gone to the police about it. And I said, that they're using town property as their own. Is there a way to get that to be stopped? Because then at least they can't get near my fence. I don't care about that. I even built my fence on my property and left that town property road, that range road that is now field, alone, but it's not theirs. And because it's small town politics, I was told you don't want to open that can of worms. And there's certain people in the town you don't want to go after, meaning the building inspector, because they all scratch each other's back. So, and he had probably done that for more than one person, just gave permits out to build. So if I opened that can of worms, it would have been many people who had property on town property. So every time I felt defeated, I would go to the police, and I was annoying them, basically. There was times I had called and they wouldn't come out. They never came. There was times I called and it would be an hour and a half. There was 2 police that were actually very nice out of the whole department who would come in and be like, I have to come in. So I was cooking dinner. They would say, were you at the neighbors? And I would say, no, I was cooking dinner. I have a baby. At this point, I was pregnant. I was pregnant with my second.
Oh.
And they would be like, well, she said you went over there, you opened up her door and you tried to attack her. And it was constant. So I'd be cooking the cops dinner because they had to come over. And it was like 2 of them, I would be like, you want to eat? I'm cooking dinner. And they'd stay for 10, 15 minutes and leave. But it was my everyday life.
What did the cops and the officials think of her, in your opinion?
I feel like the police department looked at her as an older lady and him as a vet, and gave them more respect than the young couple that was tattooed. My husband worked at a tattoo shop. And at one point, a police officer said to me, look at you, you're a tough girl. You can handle this. I don't understand why you're letting her get to you. He goes, I do this every day and I handle people like this and I'm fine. And I said to him, you were in a uniform and you chose this. This is my home. I can't get away from it. And I was judged because I was younger and that I should be able to handle the situation, and that basically that they had better things to do. They said, your problems are your problems. And if we get involved, they become our problems. And we don't want your problems because she hasn't hurt you yet. So there's nothing we can do for you. She's a squeaky wheel.
How did you feel about her turning it around on you, though?
I felt like I wasn't being believed. I felt like with the police, because they wouldn't take, and I wasn't asking them to take a side. I was asking them to look at You know, when she's saying she's looking at birds, come on, like, I'm not calling you because she's looking at birds. Like, she had lined up her patio set. If you looked at the property, she had lined up her patio set aiming at my house. So her and her husband would come over and just watch me all day and yell things at me or curse at me. It was their hobby. And I just felt like I was being annoying. And because nothing had happened, by the end of it, I felt like maybe I was losing it. Maybe I was the one. Like, it kind of made me question myself a little bit, you know, and that shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. I mean, I ended up having to go to therapy because every time I heard a small dog bark, I would jump.
Did you ever get any of this on video?
So I ended up having to get a security camera. Back, it's not now where it's on your phone. We spent $3,000 on a security system. The monitor was right next to my TV, and it had night vision. And we had that. And we had to, at that time, post that they were being under surveillance. They were under surveillance. We had to put them up very high. We had a very tall house because I was afraid she would do something to them. But she was always very careful. She knew where the cameras were. She knew the angles. You know, once that started, she changed her angles of where she was harassing. The guns would still go off in the woods all the time. You know, you couldn't, it was illegal to record voice. You could only record them.
From that standpoint, you got the lawyer involved. Tell us about that.
So we had just the public prosecutor, and he was overloaded with cases. And the courts are funny things because you want to go in when you're like this and you want to ramble off. Let me go back to the fire. She was actually arrested when she burned the trash because the police had left, but she thought the firemen had left. The fire chief had not, and he heard her screaming profanities at me, like, thanks the bleep bleep lot, you bleep bleep. Like bad stuff at me, and he heard it, and we had a no contact order. They wouldn't give me a restraining order because they had the right to live there, but they gave me a no contact order, which means neither one of us could contact each other. And the fire chief was the first one who stood up for me and said, nope, clearly heard her contact. So she was arrested for that. It was a small amount of bail. She didn't end up going to jail. She went up, paid her bail, and went home. Literally, she paid the money it was $1,200, and she walked back home, and she was right back there. She never went to jail for it. But so going back to the courts, we would go to court, and it was just that public prosecutor, and we never got much. Go to court, you want to spill everything that's going on to the court, but they don't ask anything. You have to be quiet, and the judge asks you questions. And you want to go, wait, but there's this and this, and it just felt like it was quick in and out, and there was no. So we ended up hiring a lawyer, a very good lawyer, a very nice, good lawyer. He was actually a defense lawyer, but he ended up working with us. So he was kind of a step ahead on what they were going to do and what the judge was going to say to them. And one point I was driving home, and he said, I need you to go home and sit down because I have to tell you something. And I was like, oh, okay. So I got home, and he said, are you ready? And I'm like, what? He said, the husband has an entire encyclopedia case from 10 years ago in a different town. She was the brain and he was the brawn. She would be good at really psychologically messing with you, but he was the one who was going to kill you. That's how I look at it. Like, she was the mind manipulator, and he was the one who was off his rocker. Like, he was the one to be scared of for your life. She was more, I'm going to wind this story up and get him mad, and then he's going to go after her. So he said that there's a encyclopedia of stuff that they had done to their old neighbors, and he was reading over it. So it was, he had a right to have it sealed, the neighbor did, and he forgot to do that. That's the only way my attorney came across this. If it had been sealed, my attorney would have been able to see it at all. It would have been like, but he didn't do it. It started off with the old neighbors that the police actually, because they're so manipulative, thought it was the neighbor harassing them. They actually got arrested because they were so good at manipulating. She had drawn swastikas all over her house with spray paint and called the police and said the neighbor did it. Same kind of similar situation, more extreme, but mine was heading that way. And then another neighbor stood up and said, no, this is not the way it is. They're the harassers. They're not the victims. Like, they're the ones harassing these people. So she had tried to run the lady off the road when she was jogging. Like, she tried to hit her, and the woman had to run into the woods. They filled their mailbox with sand. Eventually turning out that the husband ended up going into the neighbor's house with his gun and said, first I'm going to kill your pets, then I'm going to kill your children, and I'm going to make you watch, and you're dead next. So then he'd even gone after the police chief of that town, and had said he was on the way to the station. He knew it was his night there, and he had his gun with him, to the police chief of the town. What they got was, sell your house, give the sale of the money to the victim, move to a different town, be good for 7 years, and we're going to drop all charges if you're good for 7 years. And that didn't happen because they said, how are we supposed to buy a house if we have no money because of the sale of the house? So the neighbor just wanted them gone, and she dropped all charges so that they would get out, except for the be good for 7 years. So they got the money for the house, and they moved where they were at. So I feel like the reason they were good to me for the first short period of time, I don't think it had much to do with the fence. I think that escalated it. I think he was still under that 7-year mark of, you have to be good or you're going to be in big trouble. And it was like to the time that 7 years was up, all of a sudden full on escalating, harassing me.
How much time did this take up of your daily life to deal with all this?
All the time. My freedom was going and volunteering at the preschool. I would volunteer all the time, and she's like, why do you want to be here all the time? This is craziness. Like, even the parents don't want. It was a co-op preschool, so like there was parents in there, and I would take their days to work in there because we all had to work in there. I was always there, and I'm like, because I can't go home. I don't want to go home. There was days that I would drive around for hours just not going home. This is a house I spent a lot of money on. She had made friends with my tenants. Even after the no contact order, I would come home and she'd be sitting out back with my tenant, who's my neighbor. It's a duplex. And I'd come home and she'd wave at me. And then, but not say anything. So then I would call the police, and the police would come over and they're like, well, what did she say? Did she say anything to you? Because then you'd have a witness. And I'm like, no, she didn't say anything. They're like, well, she didn't contact you then. She can be there. Like,
she was allowed to be that close to you?
As long as she wasn't saying anything. Yeah, it was crazy. And I don't even know. Like, I feel like the cops just were kind of like, she didn't do anything, Heather. She was having tea with your neighbor. Even if she wasn't allowed, the police would not have held that because they were just saying she was just having tea with her neighbor. Like, it was just not taken seriously, ever. There was one time he was outside. I was playing with my baby. We're trying to be like there was times where I would like psych myself up, like, no, this is your backyard. Your babies at this point cannot live in the house. Like, they have to go use their yard. And I felt safer because my mom was there. And I look over, and the husband had taken this long piece of wood, and he was using it like a shotgun. And he was pretending to shoot me and the kids and my mother, and with a full army stance. His back was arched, and he was like taking aim at us with this shotgun, piece of wood. Called the police on that. They didn't see it happen. I think that's the problem. With stalking, they don't have a sign around their neck saying, we're stalking you. Every time the police want evidence, and stalkers are very good at not letting evidence happen.
How many times do you think that you called the police throughout this?
Oh man, I just went through all my police reports before talking to you guys. It's a very thick stack of police reports. There was a time where I had gone into the police department, and I had to always, it was a small apartment. There's like 6 guys at the most. And I'd have to tell my story over again because they never talked to each other. There was a time when we were looking at that fence line and she was driving over my lawn, and I told the police that she was doing that, and he came out and he said, get me the proof that that's your line. He didn't have it on me because I ran up there saying she was doing that. I said, I'll go get it, bring it back. He wrote out a report that I never dropped that off. I immediately dropped it off after. All my police reports, either the police weren't filing them or writing them. I had to make sure they were written. My father thought, that he was worried that one of us was going to get hurt. And my father doesn't mince words. He's a very strong person. So we went up and we had made leaflets for each cop and put their names on them. We collected all the reports, put them in order. We wrote their names on them, and my father went in and put them on each one of their desks. He goes, clearly there's lack of communication in this small department. So this is the updated version of everything that's going on. So the next time a cop goes to my daughter's house and they have no clue of what's happening, you now all have a copy of it, because it was just mismatch all the time. It was like, oh, we don't have that report, or you never brought that in, or it was so disorganized and disheartening. I remember walking into that police department one time with my newborn baby and my little baby and crying because we had just gotten out of court. And I said, can somebody come over because they're coming home and I'm alone? And they said, we can't do that, Heather. They haven't done anything. And I said to the police officer, the next time you see me, if I'm dead or hurt, I'm sure that you people are going to say that you did everything that could help me. Because eventually I am going to be dead or hurt. And I have babies, and they just, not our problem until something happens.
Was there a point where you felt like the cops did start to help, or never?
The officer that had heard the husband say, I'm going to get my gun and take care of it myself, he did write a report about that. The problem was, because the husband was a vet, he never went to trial because he'd go to the VA hospital. So even though he tried to help me with that, it was money after money after money. The only one that stood up for me was when we went to court for the wife with the trash burning thing. The fire chief was the only one who sat next to me in court. He got up there and testified, and he sat back down next to me. And I was so happy that he was actually there and fighting his other department. I mean, they're very tight knit, the police and the fire. And he said, I don't care, I'm going in there. She needs this. There was a time where my lawyer and I were sitting in court over harassment. I think it was actually that case. And the wife had asked for a hearing device to hear the judge. I'm like, I don't think she has a hearing problem. That's weird, but she did. She asked for a hearing device. And I was talking to my lawyer, and they're on the other side of the courtroom, and I felt like someone was looking at me. And so I turned around, and she was holding the microphone, not at the judge, but down to hear me and my lawyer talk. So I wrote on a piece of paper, stop talking, she's listening to us. And he looked over and he wrote down, oh my goodness, like, I cannot believe she's doing that. She's holding it low so no one could see, but she was listening to me and my attorney. I cried one time to my husband. I said, why are they doing this to us? Like, we're good people. We're good people. And he said, Heather, you can't explain crazy. You're her hobby. You are her hobby. And it's a hobby she's had in previous towns with him too. When we had first met, there was something she said to me when we were talking. She had brought up the fact that her husband's family had called an intervention on him, that they got together one time when she wasn't around. I don't know where she was, but she wasn't around. And they had said, we're going to not speak to you again if you stay with her. You need to come with us, grab your stuff, and leave. And she had told me that. And I thought that was a weird thing to say. This was before any of this happened. And I was like, wow, that's weird. Like, why would they do that? And she goes, she said, they just always hated me. And now his son doesn't talk to him and his family won't either. And that, I guess, like, Look at the red flags.
What did other members of your family and friends think of all this?
I think it made them uncomfortable. I feel like when you're not in it, you don't understand it. I think for my father, I'm gonna cry. He wanted to be there, but he lived 2 hours away. And I feel like he was really frustrated. We were in a lot of arguments about how to handle stuff. I mean, one time he ran to the police station and he said, if one hair is touched on my kid or my grandkid's head, I'm coming after you to the police. He goes, you're not helping her. And I can't watch. And like, he was so frustrated. I said, Dad, stop. And I think his frustration was just like, my kids are going to get hurt and nobody's doing anything. And so I had gotten mad at him for that, because I'm like, I have to deal with the police every day and you can go home. I have to keep them on my side. I don't need you getting mad at them. Like, I need you to like back it up. But I feel like he was frustrated because he couldn't help. And I feel like because he witnessed, he was threatened that he was going to get shot. Father had asked the police to search the house. My father asked the cops, go in, I want to make sure there's no weapons. He has mental issues. He's not supposed to have weapons. And the police chief said, there's no weapons in there. He didn't register any. And my father's like, yeah, you don't need to register guns in New Hampshire. You need a permit to carry, but you don't need to register them. And so they refused to search the house. But as far as like my family and friends, my friends didn't want to hear it. My friends would joke about it. They call her crazy, and then her name. They would call her and they laugh about it. So some of my friends, one of my friends was an accountant and was still doing her taxes. I also didn't want to burden them with it. Like, I felt like it was my life, and I felt like I overtalked it. So down the road, I just started quieting down about it. I just started like not involving anybody. My father, out of my whole family, was the only one who really was concerned and had my back. Did
you feel kind of isolated because you knew like, okay, if you reach out to your friends, they would assume that you're going to be talking about this?
Absolutely. And I absolutely felt like they didn't want to get involved. I absolutely felt like this was my burden to bear. One of my friends used to say, oh, every time I said, well, he'd say, what do you do? I'm like, going home. And he would say, oh, you're going to your little slice of hell. It was a joke. It was a joke, I feel like, to them a lot. But absolutely, I felt isolated. I had biker friends, like big friends. My husband had a tattoo shop, and not one of them was like, you know what? I'm going to have something to say to her, or let me help you out. They dispersed. It was like, oh, no, and then it becomes uncomfortable, because I felt like the more I talked about it, the more they thought I was crazy too. Or crazy talking about the chickens and stuff, like, because it was consuming. So eventually I just stopped talking about it.
What happened in the end? How did this resolve?
It didn't. We spent a lot of money on an attorney. At one point, the attorney, I had owed him money for 2 court sessions. He was over $400 an hour, and he had to go to the courthouse, so I had to pay that fee. He sent me a bill for $500, and I said, I owe you more than that. And he goes, I feel bad because you're sinking so much money into this, and because he's a vet, you're not going to win it. There's nothing you're going to be able to do unless he hurts you, and you're going to get hurt. His recommendation to me was, you need to short sale your house. You need to leave, or you're going to get killed. This is escalating. It's getting worse. And it is carbon copy of what he did to the neighbors before. It started small and it escalated to the point where he walked in. Oh, he had cut the phone lines and the power lines to their house. And and he knew her time period. He knew when her husband wasn't home, and he cut the lights and he cut off the phones, and he entered their house. And that's when he said, I'm going to kill your pets, your kids, and then you. And the attorney at that time had said, that is going to happen to you. That's definitely on its way to happening. And you're dumping a bunch of money into something, and I don't see an outcome. So we ended up having to short sale the house. When you short sale a house, it's basically you have to say that you can't pay the mortgage anymore, and miss 2 to 3 mortgage payments for the bank to take it back, which means it wrecks your credit. My father prided me on having amazing credit. It was one thing that really hurt me because I had spent my entire life making sure my credit was amazing. I had dumped my entire inheritance into this house. I had redone the entire house, new decks, new well, everything in that house is brand new. But at a certain point, I wasn't being a healthy parent. I was crying all the time in front of my kids. My kids couldn't go out and play like a normal child. I would shield them, to be honest, because I never knew when he was going to shoot me. So I would shield my children getting them into the car. I'd be like, look, we're going to open the door. You're going to get on this side of me. And I'd walk to the car, shielding my children to get them in the car. That's not normal living. And that went on for years. So yeah, in the end, it was cut your losses, just cut your losses and leave. And so that was hard for me too, because I had to sell the house and I had to sell it to somebody else. And I fought that in my head. Like, how do you sell a house and not tell them why? Like, how do I go about this? Because I don't feel right about that. So it was a little bit easier when it was not ours to sell. It was a little bit easier knowing I didn't really have to talk to the people, but I did tell them. He said, we had to sign papers, and the guy had said to me, was buying it, man, you put a lot of money into this house. It's beautiful. It looks like you really love that house. And I'm like, yep. And he said, did you get along with the neighbors? And I said, no, not really. And I said, do you want some advice? And I said, keep the fence up.
Do you know where they're at now?
They're in the same house. They're in the same house. I feel like a reason they wait to harass also is because I feel like, and I told the police this one time, I had seen one of the officers and I'm like, have they harassed the neighbors? And like, we don't get any phone calls. And I'm like, well, she's not stupid. She's not going to start harassing the neighbor right away, because then it's definitely her harassing neighbors. It's going to show a pattern. So they wait till the department's new people. They wait a little bit. I did drive by. Yeah, it's around, not around here. It's probably 20 minutes away. And I was going, I'm like, oh, I have to drive by that old house. And I noticed that the fence is still up and they've parked a huge motorhome near like that property line to hide themselves. I do believe there's a bit of harassment just seeing how they have the motorhome there, the fence, and then they've planted trees that are growing. But I don't know if it's to the point where it's escalated.
What would you like to see happen to that couple?
To be honest, I wish they could learn some kindness. Like, I feel bad because, part of me at that point, I was upset and angry and frustrated. And it's amazing what anxiety and harassment does to you on a daily basis. I had pictured myself just like, I was so angry, like doing something, and I've never been like that. I've never been like that. As years go on after I'm out of that situation, I feel sorry for her. I feel sorry that, like, what in her life has put her to that point where that's her hobby. It makes me sorry for them. And people like that, I wish she would see that she needs help.
What advice would you give to someone going through the same experience?
Take notes. Take notes, because nobody in the police department or courts communicate. You have to have your dates and facts and take notes. Camera systems. I think that everybody wants evidence. And I think that's a really hard thing when you're being stalked. You have to have evidence because you're being stalked. They're not going to give you evidence. It's not going to come easy. So I really feel like dates and times, pictures, and stupid pictures, like I was taking pictures of their setup. I was taking pictures of up in the barn where the lawn chairs were aimed at my house. I was taking pictures of the lawn chairs on their lawn where they had set up. And I even had a picture of her laying in there watching me. The little pictures and details mean everything. And nobody's going to communicate well in departments. You got to understand they have a million cases going on. Cops are stopping people that could be on the other side of town, and then the other cop comes out the next day, but then they just don't communicate. So the more you have it set up with your dates, times, so you don't have to keep repeating yourself or you don't forget a detail. I mean, in the end, that's what would help me in court. That's what would help me with my lawyer. He could look through all that stuff and he could see the timelines and the details of everything. And speak up about it, you know? I think the hardest thing to do is know that it's not you. You know, like for me, it was 4 years in and I was just like, oh, what am I doing wrong? Like, and it just broke me. It just broke me down to a shell of myself. And knowing that there's your podcast, knowing there's other people that are dealing with the same thing, knowing that it's not you. I mean, it can really take a toll mentally on you. It really, really takes a toll. It's heavy stuff. And they know that. The stalker knows how heavy they're being. They know what it's doing to you. And that's a dangerous place to be in, because when you're so consumed like that, you almost don't have the strength to deal with it anymore. I remember one time standing on my lawn saying, just shoot me, do something, shoot me so I can do something about this. Just hurt me. Somebody come hurt me. I was at that point where I just wanted it over. Like, I'm standing right here, right now, shoot me. You know, like just get it done so I can get this over with. But it was the little stuff that they knew where not to cross over time. And I get a support system, go to therapy, get a lawyer, like do the steps that make you healthy too. Do stuff that's going to make you feel healthy. You know, go to the gym, go to yoga, go, you know, you're feeling anxious, go for a walk in the ocean. Just don't consume yourself with it.
How has your life changed from this experience?
Well, for a long time, I was diagnosed with PTSD. Like I said before, I would hear certain things. I used to walk every day. Even when I was pregnant with my second child, you would see me pushing a stroller. This was before I had found out what they had done to the previous neighbors. When I had found out that she had tried to run over her last neighbor with her car to the point where the neighbor had to run into the woods, I stopped walking. I was always looking over my back in the supermarket, constantly thought I saw her in the corner of my eye because it's a small town. And I still to this day kind of do that. But meeting neighbors, really rough for me. I'm always questioning. I never try to get close with neighbors. I've cut off that relationship. I'm not going to bring you over cookies. I'll wave. It's made me definitely less trusting. You know, if my kids have a problem and they'll say like, I didn't think she'd be like that. I'd be like, well, you never know anybody, do you? Like, it's really made me second guess some of my friendships. It makes it hard for me to meet people and have that face value. That's gone. Like I always am looking, and I've been told I'm paranoid about that. So it changed my relationships a lot. The lack of support from my husband during that time, that never healed. Me feeling that amount of time like I was on my own, it never healed. And we ended up divorced. Mostly that situation, there's other things, but a lot of it had to do with the lack of support. I was resentful that I was doing that alone. I was resentful that he go to work and I was going to court by myself. So that broke us down.
What's life like for you now?
Good. I would say good. Every once in a while, I wonder if they're going to find me, find where I live. I certainly don't walk anymore unless I'm like in this little neighborhood. I don't go walking like I used to just be wherever I go out, but I don't really do that. I always wonder because you can find where people live easily. That's always in the back of my head, but for the most part, good. My kids are now 15 and gonna be 13. I'm a single mom, and now I own my own house again. I built my credit back up, so I've got my own place. It's small, but it's mine. Put myself through school after my divorce. I do hair now, and I think my life is pretty good. I don't have one issue with one neighbor, thank God. They're all very nice people. But yeah, I think in the big picture, I had to rebuild myself. I had to definitely rebuild myself. I lost all that money. But in the big picture, money isn't what's gonna, it's money. My kids are safe. we're happy and we're moving on. So PTSD has gone away for the most part. That was a hard thing to admit to myself when I started hyperventilating or getting anxious or wondering why. And that was a big question that used to that's a question you never ask somebody who's going through this. You never ask them, why don't you just calm down? Stop thinking about it. Why don't you calm down? You can't. That anxiety comes from out of the blue. The victim doesn't even know why they're getting anxious at that point. And the most thing you can do is say, hey, do you want to talk about something? But when somebody poo-poos it, that is the worst feeling, when someone would say, just calm down, what's the big deal? Or stop thinking about it, because it just comes out of nowhere. That took years for that to go away with me. And still to this day, it happens every once in a while. I think it's important when you're going through this to know that there's other people that have dealt with it.
For sure.
And there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Heather, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad I got a chance to talk to you guys.
If anyone out there is in need of help or is a victim of stalking, please reach out. You can find a list of resources on our Instagram at Strictly Stalking Pod.
You can watch all of our episodes on YouTube at www.youtube.com/Strictly Stalking Pod. I'm Jake Deptula.
And I'm Jamie Beebe. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Strictly Stalking.
Casey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If anyone out there is in need of help or is a victim of stalking, please reach out. You can find a list of resources on our Instagram at Strictly Stalking Pod.
I'm Jake Teptula.
I'm Jamie Beebe. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Strictly Stalking.